Hello, and welcome once again to the Jazz Musician's Voice. Today I've had the wonderful opportunity of interviewing jazz bassist Marcus Mclaurine. Marcus Mclaurine is one of the top bassists in jazz, having worked with the who's who, including Clark Terry, Dizzy Gillespie, Kenny Burell, Abbey Lincoln, Lou Donaldson, James Moody, and many others, just to name a few. He's really an excellent bassist. Marcus is also a founding member of the group Native Soul, along with Peter Brennan, Steve Johns, and Noah Haidu. He's a personal teacher and mentor of mine, especially during my time at William Paterson University, and just a wonderful bass player and very knowledgeable about the music. During the interview we talk about his life and from the early roots all the way up to all the greats that he's worked with, as well as his personal take on bass playing and his take on keeping healthy. And we also talk about some interesting anecdotes that he has to share with us. Stay tuned for future videos of Marcus, and especially with his group Native Soul, because we're planning some great stuff in the future, so please make sure you check that out. And I'm also going to be posting links to two different videos that Marcus has already produced. One showing the three-finger technique of Niels Henning Ørsted Petersen, the late great bassist, and he passed that on directly to Marcus. And another one is Marcus performing Moose the Mooch and a solo on that. So I will be posting links to that so you can check those out as well. Thanks for watching, and please stay tuned for future interviews. Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the wonderful opportunity of interviewing jazz bassist Marcus Mclaurine. Now, Marcus, for people who are not familiar with your background, could you tell us a little bit about where you're from and your early roots?
Well, I was born in Omaha, Nebraska, and left there when I was about a year old. My father was in the military, and we moved to California. He was stationed at March Air Force Base. Then we moved to Westover Air Force Base in Massachusetts, and then to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, then to Germany, and then New Mexico, and then he retired, and we moved to California. And I graduated high school in Utah, Clearfield, Utah.
Wow.
And then ultimately we moved to Texas, lived in Dallas for a while. My father eventually moved back to Nebraska. My parents settled in Omaha, Nebraska. That's where my mother's from. And after that, I spent some time, that's kind of where I started getting involved with jazz, was in Omaha, Nebraska. I was working with this gentleman, Preston Love, who used to be with the Basie Band back in the 40s and became a Motown band leader in California. And so I started to cut my teeth with him, learning how to, learning standards and that kind of stuff. And, did that for a few years in Omaha, and then I moved to New Jersey. I got in the Air Force Band, 590th Air Force Band, and which worked out well because I was near New York. I wanted to be near New York. And then I moved to New York after I got out of the military, and have been here for the past, going on 33 years now.
Wow. So let's go back, how did you originally get interested in music? I know you started as an electric bass player. Did you start listening to records, or you just running into your peers, or how did you really initially get exposed to playing the bass?
Well, it's funny because I've always liked music. Because I remember as a young kid, I used to listen to the radio, and I would always hear the bass first. I would always hear the bass. But one Christmas, my parents got me a guitar, and it was a 6-string, and I was messing around with it. But I always gravitated to the four lower strings, and I figured out, you know what? I think I'm a bass player. I don't think I'm a guitar player. And so I was actually able to save up some money. I had a little job, working as a coat check boy. My father used to be an NCO club manager in Germany. And so my brother and I used to do check coats for the people coming in. And I was able to save up enough money to be able to buy my first bass, which was Fender. Not Fender, It was Paul McCartney Hoffner.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So, you attended University of Nebraska.
Yes.
And
at Omaha.
At Omaha.
Yeah.
And did you study music there, or was it kind of an off?
I did study music there. I studied, mostly like some harmony classes. They never really had a bass teacher. I was studying with a violin teacher there, So, but I kind of learned basic harmony there, and ear training and that kind of stuff. And I think I maybe played in the orchestra, at that time. But they didn't really have a serious jazz department at all at that. That was like back in the early 70s.
Yeah, so you kind of learned more on the streets or out doing it.
I was kind of like I did like on the streets. I learned the hard way, transcribing off of records and listening and just trying to get as much information from guys who were playing, who already had been out there playing, and but I was very fortunate to be around some good players.
Sure, well that's really the important thing. And at 22 you moved to Los Angeles, California, right?
Right. I was around about 22. I moved to California. I starved out there for a couple of years. I was working with Horace Tapscott's Pan-African People's Orchestra. Horace was a really great musician. He was like I think he started out being a trombonist. Was with a trombonist with the Lionel Hampton, but something happened with his chops. His chops got messed up, and he became more of a pianist. And he was really, his group was kind of like the Sun Ra of the West Coast. But there were some really great musicians in his band. This one trombonist, Lester Robinson, who was a great trombone player. I learned a lot of things from the piano from Lester. And he also was very good friends with Eric Dolphy. Now, there's a tune, I think, called Les that Eric wrote, and I believe he wrote it for Lester. They were very close.
Interesting, and you also worked with Billy Roberts, right? A cat named Billy Roberts.
Billy Roberts or Billy Rogers?
Maybe Billy Rogers, yeah.
Billy Rogers was Billy was from Omaha also. Billy was, in my opinion, was a genius guitar player. He was like, and anybody who knows Billy knew that he was like a phenomenal guitar player. He played for a short while with the Jazz Crusaders, and there's actually a Downbeat magazine. I think back in probably around '76 or '75. He's on the cover with the Jazz Crusaders. But Billy was like a genius player. Like David Stryker is also from Omaha, was like a disciple of Billy's, and Billy unfortunately had an untimely death, overdose. But he was a beautiful musician and a beautiful person.
And that's unfortunate that he's no longer around. But how did you make the switch from electric bass to upright bass?
What happened? Well, first of all, I was playing in like rock and roll bands when I was in high school. I used to play in this group called the Zonk Machine, and that was like my first rock and roll band. And then I started getting into the R&B, like Motown. I really was a big fan of James Jamerson. It was like who's the genius electric bass player with the Motown scene. And then, like I say, I started getting. I met some musicians who were into John Coltrane, and we used to have these arguments. I also got into. Well, while I was in Texas, I got involved with the blues scene. It was a heavy blues scene, so I was very much into the blues at that time. So when I came back to Omaha, I used to have these arguments with these guys. They said, "No, jazz is better than blues." And, no, blues is where it's at, So they said, well, "Listen to this," And they put on some John Coltrane. I said, "Wow, what is that stuff?" And so that kind of caught my ear, because I said I'd never heard it before. And but what really turned my head was there's another friend of mine, another great musician who I learned from, Stimsy Hunter, alto saxophonist. And he used to play in this group called the Electric Flag. Matter of fact, there were several guys from Omaha who were like in that band. Buddy Miles, one, and Herbie Rich, keyboard, and Stimsy were all in the Electric Flag. Well, anyway, Stimsy turned me on to this record, Charlie Parker with Strings, and he played for me, Just Friends. And when I heard it, I had never heard anything like that in my life. When I heard Charlie Parker playing, it just turned my head around. I said, I got to try to figure out what that is, you know.
Yeah, that's a beautiful record. One of my favorites. It's just the bird is. He's playing like a bird. He's above everyone.
Oh yeah,
It's amazing.
It's like just pure beauty.
And so, when you back to LA, when you were in LA, how was the scene there at that time? Must have been a unique time to be in LA.
The scene was actually pretty vibrant. You know, there's a lot going on. That's where I first met Billy Childs. Also, I was at the time staying at this place called Onaje's Tea House. Now, this is not Onaje Allen Guns. This is Onaje Murray. He's a vibraphonist who lives in L.A. He was from Texas, from Houston. He was very good friends with Ronnie Laws. He came from that whole scene. And I was staying, it's called Onaje's Tea House. We were one Saturday night, we were just kind of hanging out. There was no music happening. And this young kid walks in, skinny kid walks in and sits down at the piano and just proceeds to like tear the piano up. And we were like, from like McCoy Tyner to Bud Powell to Bach. He was just going off on the piano. And we asked him, "Who are you?" He "My name's Billy Childs," And that's how we first met Billy. He's about 16 years old.
Interesting. So, and then in 1976, you joined the U.S. Air Force as an airman.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you toured the world with the
we toured mostly
590th Air Force Band, right?
That's right. We actually performed like the Eastern seaboard. We played all up and down the eastern coast. We actually went to Nova Scotia and played, and we did go to the Azores every year, which I hated that trip because we used to fly on these C-130s, prop jet, and they're like so loud you can't hear anybody. You could be right next to the person, and you couldn't hear a word they were saying. It was just so loud, and you were sitting with somebody on each side of you, and your knees were almost touching someone right across from you. So it wasn't a pleasant trip. I used to dread that trip every year. But once we got there, it was beautiful. The Azores is a beautiful island. And we actually one year did go to Portugal. It's actually a possession of Portugal. And we went to Portugal, went to Lisbon, and that was really nice.
Cool. And so, working in the military at that time, did you run into any musicians in particular? Like working in that band, you run into any guys that you ended up running into later?
Well, what happened was, coincidentally, one of my good friends now, who one of the reasons why I'm in New York was Clifford Adams, trombonist. What happened was one night, some of the guys on the bass in the band, we were all interested. Some of us were really into the jazz scene. There was a club in Trenton called Lansley's, and we heard that Richie Coles was playing there this particular night. So let's go out and meet, or go out and hear the band. So we all went down and checked out the band. The band was smoking. Richie sounded great. The bass player sounded great. So afterwards, I went up and introduced myself to the bass player. I said, and I can't remember his name now, but he was like a local New Jersey bass player, good bass player. And so he said, "Yeah, well, you want to play my bass?" And so I was messing around with his bass. So this one guy from the audience comes up and says, "Oh, you're a bass player. There's a friend of mine who plays a trombone. I think, you might like to meet him." I said, "Oh, really?" So he said, "Let me get your number." So I gave my number. I didn't think very much of it. And so a few weeks go by, and I get this phone call. He said, "Oh, yeah, my friend, the trombone player, is in town. And I'm having a party. Why don't you come over? And, if you're free, come over, hang out." I said, "Oh, yeah, I'm free. I'll come over." So I went over, I met him. It was Clifford Adams. I think he was on the road with the Stylists or somebody, And so we started playing. He had a piano player and drummer, and we all played. But the other guys stopped playing. And so Clifford and I, we kept on playing. We just really had this vibe, and we kept playing and playing. And so after we finished, he said, "Give me your number. I might have something for you." I said, "Oh, okay." I thought nothing of it. So went back to my duties at the Air Force Base, and I get a call a couple weeks later. It says, "I got a gig for you in New York." I said, "Really?" It's an after-hours gig. The gig starts at 3 a.m.
Oh, wow.
I said, "Well, my dream was to play in New York, so I said, I don't care. I'll do it, So I come up and do the gig. Rudy Walker was on drums at that time. And I think it was myself and Clifford. I can't remember who was on piano, but might have just been a guitarist. Anyway, I can't remember. But that's and so he actually convinced me because my intention was really to get out of the Air Force and go to California because I was really tired of winter. They had some brutal winters back then. I said, I'm tired of snow. I'm ready to go out to the ocean and lay up on the beach, you know. And so here, 33 years later, you know, here I sit, you know.
Well, but, still hope in the future, right?
Yeah, still, yeah, right. Just keep hope alive, you know.
So, you got to New York in the very early 80s, 1981, right?
Well, I actually moved. I got out of the military and moved to New York in October 1980.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and that was a unique time because that's the start of the New Young Lions scene in New York.
Right.
You know, some of the guys like Winton.
Winton was just brand new on the scene. Just he really wasn't really known. He was just starting to get known. You know.
So, can you tell us about how New York was when you first arrived? How was the scene? And,
wow. The scene was really popping. You know, I mean, it was really like Art Blakey's band was very much happening. Woody Shaw's band, Dexter Gordon. You know, that's where I used to go hear Rufus Reed. You know, I became a real huge fan of Rufus's through that band, and also I used to come down and hear Thad Jones and Mel Lewis at the Vanguard. You know, got a chance to hear Thad and Mel together. That was like a real treat. Betty Carter, Sarah Vaughan, Carmen McRae, you know, I mean, all the greats were like very vibrant and still, you know, contributing musically, you know.
That's really amazing. You got to be there at that time. Tell us about some of your favorite clubs and maybe a little bit about the spot, or you know.
Well, you know, when I used to come, like when I was still in the military. Oh, there's another person who's important. Also, reason why I came to this was Peyton Crosley, drummer. He plays with Ron Carter. Well, yeah. Peyton is also from Omaha. I knew Peyton when he's about 10 or 11 years old. I met him in Omaha, and he was just a young kid, but he was playing drums back there. He was like a little prodigy, young prodigy in Omaha, but he was living in New York, and at that time. Was kind of struggling, you know. But he's a young guy. He was like a teenager, you know. And we went down. He turned me on to all the clubs. We went down to Boomers and hung out, and heard Houston Person and Eddie Jones. And at that time, there was no place. Sonny Phillips was playing organ, and Sonny was a great organist. I think he may have passed by now, but he was a great organist. Another person who was very influential was Khalid Moss, pianist who used to work with. Betty Carter. He also worked with Yusef Lateef. Khalid, I met while I was in Omaha, just like a few weeks before I was going into the military. I got a call that there was a pianist in town who needed a drummer and a bass player for a TV show that was being filmed in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so I went and did it, and it was Khalid. And Khalid, you know, told me, when you get out, you know, when you come out to New York, you get in the Air Force, call me, you know. And so when I got to New York, I called and said, Khalid, I'm here, you know. I'd like to come up and hang out. He said, come on up, you know. And really interesting, he took me to Central Park, showed me all the places, took me to the Apollo, and also took me to Mamoun's, which is a Middle Eastern place where they serve falafels and hummus, and I didn't know what that was. He said, you want to get a falafel? I said, what's that, you know? And so he turned me on to my first falafel, which was a great thing. You know, 'cause to this day I love falafels. He also took me to Pharoah Sanders' apartment. We hung out with Pharoah. You know, Pharoah probably wouldn't even remember, but we went over to Pharoah's place and hung out. He was working with Pharoah Sanders at the time also.
That must have been unique work, meeting Pharoah and talking with him.
Oh yeah.
You have any notable memories?
Well, it was like I said, I was kind of like overwhelmed, really. That we were just hanging out with Pharoah. You know, he just went over and just hung out. He was just very casually just hanging out. They were just talking. You know, I was just kind of just sitting there observing. You know, but I do remember that.
So, and then in 1981, you got the call to join one of the biggest legends in jazz, Clark Terry.
Oh yeah.
And can you tell us about how that?
I'll tell you how that happened. That's an interesting this goes back to Clifford Adams now, because Clifford was actually introduced me to all the musicians, you know, not all, but you know, and we were going down to jam sessions. I was sitting in trying to meet musicians, and But anyway, Clifford got a gig at this club that's no longer in existence called Lickety Split up in Harlem. And Rudy Walker on drums. I think James Wyman might have been on piano. Anyway, we played on, and when we finished, someone came over and said that Melba Liston's in the audience and she would like to meet you. And really, I didn't know who Melba Liston was. But I said, okay. So I went over and she was there with two young ladies, Erica Lindsay, tenor player, and Francesca Tanksley, pianist. And she said, I really enjoyed your playing. Would you like to join my band? I said, yeah, definitely. And actually Clifford and I both joined the band, that night.
Interesting.
And what was interesting about that, because everything in life, there's no coincidences in life. Everything happens for a reason, and this is what really proves it to me. So I started working with Melba. We actually did Carnegie Hall, and Dizzy Gillespie came and sat in with the band. I remember he had his little rain cane where he just came with all his symbols on it, and I think Clark might have been in the audience that night, but we played it. It was at the Cool Jazz Festival or whatever. But anyway, we were working. Then all of a sudden, we weren't working that much. We kind of were working. Well, anyway, I get this phone call. Anyway, Clark calls Melba, and she says, he says, I need a bass player. And she says, call my bass player, Marcus Mclaurine. And so I'm at home watching TV, and I get this phone call, and this person says, yeah, this is Clark Terry. I have a gig up in Quebec City in a weekend in the Blue Note. Can you make it? I said, yeah, right. This is Clark Terry. Sure. I said, no, this is Clark Terry. This is Clark Terry. I said, okay. I can do it, So I go down and do the gig at the Blue Note. I'm like, I'm a nervous wreck because this is Clark Terry. I was like, no rehearsal, no nothing. Just go on the bandstand and play. And that's how I got in the band. And it was like, to this day, we still haven't rehearsed.
Wow, that's really great that happened for you. And I'm sure you have countless memorable memories of Clark and performing with him.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what he instilled in you and some things that stood out for you working with Clark over all these years?
Well, Clark is really, I just, number one, feel very blessed to have been in part of that band and in part of his organization because he's such an iconic figure in his music and has affected so many people. He's just a real, true human being. The kind of person that if he's in your corner, he's in your corner for life. But if he gets on the other side, that's for life too. He's one of those guys. If you stay true to him, he'll stay true to you. And there are some incidents I can think of that one in particular incident that really made me know that he's a really great individual. It was a situation happened. This kind of early. I had been in the band maybe a couple of years, and there was a place called the Village West, and we had a gig there. And at the time, my car had broken down, and I had to rely on a cab to get to the city. I lived in Queens, but I couldn't get a cab. No cabs would come and pick me up, and so I ended up finally getting a cab. I get to the gig, and I'm late for the gig. There's another bass player playing, and I'm saying, "Wow." I blew it, So they finish the set. He comes down. He says, "Yeah, you really messed up, did you? You really messed up." I'm being nice with what he said. But and then I said, "Yeah, because you missed. What happened to the gig this afternoon that you missed?" I said, "What? I forgot. There was a gig that afternoon that I had totally forgotten about."
Whoa.
And I said, "Oh my God," So I went back. They all went back to the dressing room back there. He's back there talking with his friend, and the drummer he's trying to console me, because I'm like depressed. I said, "I know he's gonna fire me. I just know he's gonna fire me now, And so, so they're getting ready to go back on the stage, going back, and he comes over to me and says, "Okay, here's what we'll do. You come back and finish the set. You pay the bass player. You take care of him. and you come up and finish the rest of the gig. And that point, from that point on, I knew this was a great man. This guy, he was a guy who, you talk about forgiveness, you know, he could have got any bass player on the planet to come to this gig. But that showed me that he really, he knew that I wasn't really trying to, mess him around. I messed up, and he could see it. And from that day on, I've been a total fan of Totals, I've been in Clark's corner ever since.
Wow, that's an amazing story, Clark seems to be a very forgiving guy, I remember the story that Miles Davis told in his autobiography about pawning off all of Clark's stuff.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I think I asked him about that once. He's like, yeah, well, I had to help out Miles,
Right. No, he's got a big heart. He's really a big heart, man. Like I said, once he's in your corner, he's in your corner.
So, traveling with Clark, you guys probably travel all over the world. You have any favorite performances that stand out to you?
Well, let's see. Let me think. All the performances were, pretty special. Anytime on the bandstand with him, I can think of a kind of a special moment though. Speaking of Europe, we had just arrived to Europe. We were at Charles de Gaulle airport, and so we had got there. We had our luggages. The promoter hadn't come yet, and we were kind of just waiting for the promoter to arrive. So Clark said, I'm going to go get a croissant or something and some tea or coffee. I'll be back. I'll be back in a minute. So he left. So I can't remember who all was in the band. I think Charles Brom was the drummer at that time. We're sitting by the luggage and just kind of waiting. All of a sudden, Miles walks up. And we're like, he says, where's Clark? And we said, he went to go get a croissant or coffee. He'll be back in a minute. And he just waits. He just stands there. And so we're like, I'm saying to myself, well, what do you say to this guy? Like, I dug kind of blue, or what are you gonna say? And but he's just standing there, got like this look. I got probably the red leather jumpsuit and the hair and the glasses and everything. And so all of a sudden we see Clark coming in the distance. We see Clark coming, and as he gets closer and closer, he sees Miles, and he yells out, Inky! And that's the nickname that Clark is probably one of the few people on the planet who could get away with calling Miles that. And when they got together, they just embraced and just to witness the love that those two guys have for each other was pretty amazing.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that Miles Davis's idol is still alive and kicking.
Yeah.
And Clark Terry is inspiration for so many, countless thousands of musicians.
Oh yeah.
And it's really amazing that you got to perform with him for well over close to 30 years,
close
right?
To 30 years, that's right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, now Clark is not playing so much anymore, but
right.
You've remained his bassist all throughout.
That's right. Yeah.
And, so let's talk a little bit about your time as a bassist, because we're both bassists, and
right.
I want to talk about some of the great bassists that you've learned from, because you told me that you got some memorable teachers, Ron Carter and Ray Brown.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about each of those two guys and something you've learned from both?
Well, I never really studied with Ray, physically, but I feel like I've studied his playing, and I've always loved his playing very much, and I've heard him play on several occasions.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And just watching him play and just to hear his sound and just see his just natural ability, he just exuded, just total bass, performance. I just love his choice of notes, his choice of rhythm, time, everything. I mean, he was, to me, the epitome of what a bass player should sound like. He just totally, exuded that quality. Ron, I took some lessons with Ron, and I didn't study many lessons, but the lessons that I took with him were very, very profound and very impactful. He taught me some very serious things about just time and just and even just how to practice. Because Ron is a stickler. Like he would, I remember we were working on, so I would read some. If I made a mistake, he would stop me. He wouldn't let me continue. He said, "Go back to the top."
Yep.
And start again.
Yeah.
That's a big lesson, because it's very easy to keep making the same mistakes over and over again and not correcting them. But he wouldn't let you get away with making a mistake. You correct it and go back and do it until you get it right. So I learned that from him. He was very meticulous about that. And I try to use that with my students.
Yeah, that's something I remember very clearly studying with Ron. If you don't play it right, he wants you to play it 10, 20 times until you get it right.
That's right.
And if you have to keep going back, he said the first time you get it right, then you got to play it 10 times right for the first time you get it right. So, any particular things he taught you technically? What kind of books did you guys work on at that point?
At that time, I think I was just using, it might have been Simandl. Was probably Simandl.
Yeah, that's what I was using.
Yeah. Just, basically we're just working on some bow technique and reading technique. And we talked actually a lot. We talked about amps. I remember we sat down one time and just sat and talked for about maybe 45 minutes or so, just talking about amps. And so he was and you go hear him. He's very meticulous about his sound. And what amps and pickups, and he's very meticulous about everything that he does. So
yeah. Yeah, he's got a very unique tone, and I've heard plenty of Ron Carter absorbed in your playing. You have a very similar long tone about your playing, where a lot of cats just have a thump in their playing.
Right.
And you've also told me that you've learned from a master class a little bit about the three-fingered playing that Enhop was doing.
Yeah. He actually showed me that himself, which was really, it's kind of a rare thing, because he actually was doing a gig at the Village Gate. It was Niels, and it was a trumpet player, just the two of them, as a bass and trumpet. I think it's Paley something, it's a Danish trumpet player. And it was at the first level at the Village Gate, and I remember the place was packed. And I mean, he told me that's the first time I heard him live. I heard him on recordings, and his recordings always blew me away. But when I heard him live, it was just, he played stuff. I said, man, seems like it's physically impossible to play the stuff he's playing, But I actually had the nerve to go up and talk to him on the break, and I said, yeah, obviously the Loftus is playing. I said, could you show me how you're doing that, And he showed me the concept, the three-finger concept.
Interesting.
And he said,
he showed to us. We'll get a little video later.
Yeah, okay.
You show it to us a little bit about what you learned. As a jazz bassist, a teacher, and a mentor of mine, what advice can you instill in young bassists that are trying to get started in jazz? What memorable things have you learned that you'd like to pass on?
Yeah, one thing I know about bass playing this music in drum, you never stop learning. I'm for me, I'm always in practice mode, trying to always develop and try to get more information, try to develop at a higher level, always trying to get more, And I would say that the key is practice. That's the key. To practice incessantly, and working on trying to, sound is always an issue, trying to get the sound that you want. The strings, I know bass players go through this, finding the right strings, the right pickup, the right height, everything is just a constant progression of trying to always improve. But I think the biggest thing is to always never be happy, never be comfortable with where you are, never be satisfied. Always be striving to get to the highest level that you can possibly get.
Wow, that's great. It's very important to keep pushing, the limits. Yeah. Do you have any particular advice for electric bassists? Because you're also an accomplished electric bassist, and anything particular for them that they might be able to take away?
Well, the thing is, it's very tough, because if you play both instruments, to maintain both is very tough sometimes, you know. So sometimes I know I have to like make it a point to put time on the electric bass just to maintain that, because it's a totally different technique, you know. So it's the same thing, you know. Just really try to balance, keep them both, you know. Sometimes it's hard because you don't always have a job that requires you to play electric bass. You know, you might just have a performance where you're just playing upright, or vice versa. You might be in a situation where you're just playing electric, you know. That's one of the things, this group I'm involved with, Native Soul, which affords me the opportunity to be able to play both, you know. So I've been fortunate to be able to use both in that band.
That's great. You know, let's talk a little bit about Native Soul and you've done a lot of your own original compositions in that group, and
right.
You guys are all kind of collectively in that band.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the members of the band and the concept behind the group.
Well, the band. Well, maybe I can tell you a little bit about how we got started. We've been together approximately about 8 years now, and Noah Haidu had found out about this. There was a State Department tour, like a Latin State Department tour, and so he called me. I met Noah when he was like, I think probably 18 or 19, so we'd known each other for a few years, and he called Steve Johns and Peter Brannon to get together and maybe try to form this group to do this, you know, the State Department tour. So we did it. We rehearsed, went to the audition, didn't make it. But we actually liked what we heard when we played. We liked how we felt. We thought that, man, I think we have a band here. There's something going on here. We need to maybe, and we realized we all were like, you know, composers. So we said, well, let's try to put something together. So we went and got our original material, put it together, and we put out our first record, which was called Rough Jazz, which didn't really get much notoriety, you know, unfortunately. But then we did our second CD, which was called Soul Step, and that one I actually used electric bass. The first two were used electric and upright. The newest one, One Mind, was just all acoustic. We wanted to try another approach for the but anyway, so we got together, and we've been together now for 8 years, and we're ready to work on our fourth CD. You know, so we're very happy. We've got some good airplay on the last CD, and so our thing is to try to stay together, because right now in jazz you don't really have that many jazz groups per se.
Yeah. So
we feel like we have something very special, because we know every time we get on the bandstand, something happens that's very magical that we can't really, you know, this is the kind of thing that you just can't make happen. It has to happen on its own accord. And so when I get on the bandstand with him, it's like magic, and it's pure pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the group live, and you guys sound great. And can you tell me a little bit about, because you've written some compositions for this group, your concept behind composing?
Yeah, yes, it's interesting. Like, it's like sometimes for me, like compositions just come to me automatically. They just just all of a sudden, like a melody will just come in and pop into my head. I don't know where it came from, but that's how a lot of songs that I've written have come. They have just popped into my head. And sometimes you have to kind of like seize the moment. You know, if you don't act on those, they just leave. So I'm at the point now, if I hear it, I jump on it right away, and I put it on the keyboard and then record it, and then start, just that's the kind of the foundation of it.
Yeah, that's a good way to go about it, being able to just lay it down. For me, sometimes I actually hum into my iPhone or something until I can get home and
same way.
out.
Matter of fact, I have a song right now. I have a song that I've written for Clark Terry, and the melody came to me about 2 months ago. And so I had my phone and said, I better put this. So I sung the melody in the phone. The melody's actually in my phone. I gotta sit down and put it on the keyboard and start putting it together. But the melody's already there.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, and then the other group you were in was Lines of Reason.
Lines of Reason, yes, another group. That's what Clifford Adams is actually a part of that band.
And I've heard some of that as well, and there's some real nice music. What was that concept? How was that group?
This band had been together for a while. Actually, before I joined, And the original members were Calvin Hill on bass, who used to work with McCoy Tyner, Michael Cochran, Alan Nelson, and David Gross, who was an alto saxophonist who had an untimely death a few years ago. So Calvin left the band, and they asked me to join the band, because I had known the other guys for a long time, and so I joined the band and began writing. That's kind of where I started writing, was with that band. And after Dave passed, we asked Joe Ford to join the band. And then after Joe, Clifford Adams joined the band. Clifford Adams has been with Kool and the Gang for about 30 years. He's a prolific jazz player. He's played with all the greats in the jazz field.
It's great, and you guys have a long
very long history. Yeah. Very long history, yeah.
Okay, and in addition to working with Clark Terry, you worked with who's who in jazz. Dizzy Gillespie, Kenny Burrell, James Moody, Lou Donaldson, Joe Williams, John Hendricks, Abbey Lincoln.
Right, yeah.
Count Basie Orchestra under the direction of Thad Jones. Tell us a little bit about working with some of these groups, some notable memories from some of these guys. Let's start with Dizzy Gillespie.
Dizzy, yeah. I actually did a few gigs with Dizzy. This was kind of early on when in New York. It was on electric bass, at that time.
Interesting.
And it was I enjoyed. We actually remember rehearsing at his house, and and we did some gigs. I think in New York, and I did some gigs up in Massachusetts with him. And what I remember, he was like very happy-go-lucky, fun-loving person, I wish I had worked longer with him, but the time that I did work with him was memorable. I really enjoyed it,
And let's talk about James Moody and Lou Donaldson.
Now I worked with James. Actually, was on a tour with Clark. We were on a European tour. It was Clark Terry, James Moody, and I'm trying to think of it. Might have been Charles Fox on piano, and I think Alvin Queen on drums. And James, another great player. Just a consummate entertainer. And it was just I felt very honored also to be on the same bandstand with him.
And the Count Basie Orchestra, you just got back from performance with them.
I just recently, but I was actually doing the you just mentioned with Thad. That was like in 1985. Dennis Wilson called me, who was playing trombone at the time with the band, and I did it was about maybe a month, maybe a little month, over a month tour with them, but. Thad, I remember I got the call to do the gig. We did like this cotillion down in Virginia at this university. And again, no rehearsal. I got the call, went down, played. I was like shaking, nervous. I was like, wow, I hope I don't mess up, whatever, So I remember what Thad did after we were done. He came over to me. He says, keep on doing what you're doing. You're doing a good job, He made me feel good.
That's great.
Whereas, he could have easily said, man, you're out of here, But he really made me feel, I got a chance to know that, and he was another beautiful individual, just a really great human being. Yeah.
And that segues into a great William Paterson University, where Thad Jones was the founder.
That's right, yeah.
Musically, and turns out that you were a teacher, an associate professor there on bass.
Right.
I studied under you at William Paterson University. What's it like being at William Paterson? Tell us your experience.
Well, I have to tell you the story about how that kind of happened too. There's a story behind that. At the time, before that, I was working with the South African pianist Abdullah Ibrahim, and had been touring around, and was with him for about maybe 2 or 3 years. I recorded with him, but I left the band, and it happened to be down at the bass shop, David Gay's bass shop, getting my bass worked on. And I get down there, Rufus Reed is there, Jay Lenhart, and another bass player were there. And so it's very unusual to see that many bass players at once down there. And so Rufus said, well, let's go get something to eat, so get a pizza or something, get something to eat. So we all went to this pizza joint and just kind of hung out, and it was like kind of unusual, but it was very nice, So when we got over, we went to go get our basses and everything, and Rufus said, well, Marcus, give me your phone number. I might have something for you. So I gave him my information. So he gives me a call. He called me like about 2 or 3 weeks later. He calls me. He says, Marcus, a position just opened up at William Paterson.
Wow.
Are you you think you might be interested? Well, I hadn't really been thinking about teaching at the time, but I said, well, but in the back of my mind, when opportunity knocks, you have to answer. I said, well, okay. But the good news about that, I had been working with Clark as jazz camps, which the first camp I did was back probably in 1991. Major Holly was the bass player, but Major passed away, and so they needed a bass player. And I had been working with Clark, and so Clark asked me if I would come and be a part of the jazz camp. This is in Oklahoma. And so I had the great opportunity to spend many sessions and many camps with Clark, watching him teach, and actually was able to kind of develop some skills teaching through watching him, and so that's how that started. So I told him, so make a long story short, I told Rufus, definitely, and so now I've been there since that was 1997, I think.
Wow, so you've been there quite some time.
Yeah.
So you're also the head of some ensembles there, and usually there's 2 ensembles that you direct each semester, right?
Well, it's sometimes, but this time I've only had one.
Okay.
I just had one this semester, usually one.
Well, it must be nice to be the kind of director and showing students, particular techniques that you've learned being out in the real world in jazz.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's I really teaching is it's the kind of thing that's it's not for everybody. I mean, there's some really great players out there, but they just don't have a desire to teach. But for me, I enjoy teaching. It's not something that I actually pursued. It kind of pursued me. But I found that I enjoy helping people learn, and because people have helped me along the way, and I've been very appreciative of that. So I like to do all that I can to help someone to develop their craft.
Sure. I mean, it's great that you're teaching all of us young cats. I came out of William Paterson, having studied with both you and Steve.
Right. Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah, it's not long ago. What do you think about jazz being taught on a collegiate level? Because I'm sure you kind of learned actually by doing it on the scene. I think it's a different situation now. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword because there's a lot to be said for academia. You can learn, and just like far as harmony and theory and all that stuff is very very important. But the other side of it is the soulful part, the actual just being out there and doing it, and just learning kind of like having those hard knocks and learning the hard way. There's something I remember hearing. I think maybe Bird said, like, you learn all the theory and you learn it, then you just forget it and play, and because it's kind of hard to put your finger on what that thing is. But that's why I call it the soulful part of it, where you want to maintain that soulful quality in your playing. You don't want to be just all academia, because then you end up sounding like a book. You don't want to sound that way. You want to be able to have that soulful quality in your playing, where you really. And so the real key is like listening. You go back listening to all those great recordings. Go back far as Pops. And on all the way up, listen to the recordings, and they really are the teachers. Those recordings, and transcribing and listening. Listening is so important, because what happens is if you listen, like I like to tell my students, the key to mastery is repetition is the key to mastery. So you get that music inside of you. When you start to play, then you will just transmit, what's already inside of you. But you'll interpret it how you interpret it,
Yeah, I mean, it's a unique way of looking at it, to remember everything, learn everything, and then forget it. And you have a unique philosophical approach to practicing and playing the bass. You've talked to me about, taking good care of your health and breathing techniques.
Right,
I understand you're a vegetarian as well.
Absolutely. That's so, to me, that is so vital, because how you feel is going to be transmitted through what you play. And I try to maintain my health as much as possible through diet, through exercising. Breathing is there's one thing you can do without a lot of things in this world. Air is not one of them, so it's very vital to really have our breathing under control, and breathing as we play. Now, see, as bass players, which is very interesting that you brought the breathing. See, horn players have to breathe by the nature of their instrument. They have to blow through it to get sound. Being a bass player or a pianist or a guitarist, string players, they don't have that luxury. So we have to, I was very fortunate to study with a classical bassist, Jack Kula, who I don't want to forget, was very instrumental. I studied with him while I was in the military. It was very instrumental in helping me develop my bow technique and just in having an appreciation for classical music. He taught me the importance of breathing while playing, and I try to even take it. Now that was just with bowing and breathing, but even with pizzicato, you can still employ the same technique. Breathing is so fundamental, in playing.
Yeah, it's great that you instill that, in your whole playing and your whole life. You're in real great shape, and you take good care of your health, which is important for musicians,
Absolutely. Because we've had so many, in the history of the musician, so many of our great players have have fallen because of not taking care of themselves properly, But I think there's a new wave of new musicians now. The younger musicians, I think, have learned from that. And now they're taking better care of themselves. They're starting to be conscious of diet and exercise. That's something that... So that, to me, I think is a plus. That's a very positive thing for the music.
Yeah, it's important, and hopefully as time goes on, we won't have the stereotypical jazz musician dying too young.
Exactly. You don't hear a lot of that anymore. You don't hear a lot of that.
And you told me a little bit that you work with Clark Terry teaching jazz camps, and recently you've taught at Litchfield.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that experience teaching it.
I've actually been very fortunate to do 3 jazz camps. I do the William Paterson Summer Jazz Program, which is a very good program. Litchfield, which I love up there because it's in the country, it's in the air. Like when you go up places, I also teach it in Vermont, which is also up in the mountains, and to get fresh air is such a luxury, that we don't get here in New York. My lungs just say thank you so much, for giving me some good air.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful up there with the trees, and I've been a very big lover of just being out in the woods and just that whole rustic lifestyle, so it's really a pleasure to be up there.
Yeah, being outdoors here in New York, it's a little challenging. There are parks, but it's not the same.
It's not the same because even to see you take like being able to look up in the sky and see stars. You take that for granted, but you don't always see stars living in the city. But you go to Vermont, somewhere up in the mountains, you look up in the sky, and you see like a comet shower. It's breathtaking.
Yeah, it's really something else. My family's from Massachusetts, Western Mass.
Yeah, so
And, when we're driving up the Taconic, you get to, Poughkeepsie area, you park in one of those rest stops, and you just look up in the sky. It's just amazing, the amount of stars you can see.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about the bigger picture. We're living in a unique time in jazz. Where do you foresee the music taking us in the next coming years?
Well, that's a good question there. You know what? Okay, well, here's what I feel. I think that the music scene right now, jazz scene in particular, is redefining itself. It's actually trying to find itself. Because, like I said earlier, 30 years ago, Art Blakey, Betty Carter, Sarah Vaughan, Carmen McRae, Freddie Hubbard, Woody Shaw, and countless others are no longer with us. We only have a very few of the great jazz masters living with us today. So consequently, it's being redefined, and it's hard to know where it's going, I pray that things will go in a positive direction and the music will continue to grow, which I think it will, because we have still some greats like people like Harold Mayburn still here on the scene, and Kenny Barron, and others we probably can't think of right offhand right now, but there's still some greats still here to can help direct the path somewhat. But what happens is a lot of times it gets out of the hands of the musicians, and I think that sometimes it can be problematic, But I've always been one to be very optimistic, and I always try to hope that things will go in the right direction. Well, not say right, but in a very positive direction.
Okay, well, yeah, that's a great way to look at it, and I think that's very perceptive. That jazz is in a period of time where it's defining itself, and who knows where it'll end up. But hopefully, it's up to us younger cats to take it in the right direction.
I think ultimately that's right. I think it's up to the younger players, to decide to really define where the scene is going to go.
Yeah. Well, do you have any particular overall advice for young musicians getting into the music? As an experienced jazz musician.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the biggest thing is to always go back and really go back and research the history. Really go back and really in other words, don't forget the roots of the music. Really honor the roots of this tradition. And also not only that, because we live in a time where there's so many genres. I've been involved with the R&B, the rock and roll, blues, jazz. I've done some classical stuff. Not a lot, but I've done some orchestral stuff. And the thing is and I like country and western. Some country and western I like, because I was exposed to it, at a very early age. So I think to be able to maybe take all those genres and be able to maybe even come up with something that's unique. I think that's. I don't want to be like one of these purists say you just got to listen to one thing. I think you should be open-minded, and because music is music. And I always like what Duke Ellington said. Just said there's only two types of music, good and bad.
Yeah. Well, Marcus, thank you for doing this interview. Where can people check you out and your music?
Well, that's a good question. Hopefully soon to Native Soul and be able to check out Lines of Reason. Hopefully traveling all over the world. Also, I'm working with the Count Basie Orchestra now, and I feel very honored to be a part of that organization again, because I fell in love with that band when I did that tour with them, and I didn't stay with them at that time, but I fell in love with the band, and I hope that I can continue to make music with them and so I can be heard with them, if you ever hear the band playing around.
And you also work with the Swing 46 Orchestra here in New York sometimes, right?
Yes, I've done some work with George G's band, on occasion. Definitely, I've been with George probably over 20 years.
Tell us about your website. What's the name of your website?
My personal website is marcusmclaurine.com, and then the others there's Lines of Reason could be found at jazzcorner.com, and Native Soul is nativesoul.net.
Great. Thanks a lot.